Two small apartments. Same square footage, similar budget, similar quality of furniture. One looks beautiful in every photograph. The other looks merely furnished. The difference is not taste. It is 8 specific visual principles, the way the human eye actually processes a room before any conscious judgment occurs. Here is what they are and exactly how to use them. The first principle explains why some rooms feel composed and others feel simply occupied, and it comes from a basic feature of how the visual system processes a scene. The eye does not absorb a room all at once. It moves through it in a sequence of fixations, jumping from point to point, and the brain assembles those fixations into a single impression. A room that gives the eye a deliberate path to follow, a sequence of elements at varying heights and distances that lead naturally from one to the next, produces a smoother, more pleasurable visual experience than a room where the eye has to search for where to land. This is visual rhythm, the repetition and variation of elements at intervals that create a sense of movement through the space. A tall plant, then a lower lamp, then a piece of art at mid-height, then a low side table, each element at a different height, creating a kind of visual cadence that the eye follows almost like a musical phrase. A room without this rhythm, where everything sits at roughly the same height, or where elements are scattered without any height variation, gives the eye nothing to follow, and the absence registers, even if the person looking cannot say exactly why the room feels flat. The second principle addresses what happens after the eye has moved through a room's rhythm. It needs somewhere to stop. Every beautiful room contains at least one element designed to function as a visual resting point, a place where the sequence of movement concludes and the eye can settle without needing to keep searching. Without this resting point, a room produces a specific kind of low-level visual fatigue. The eye keeps moving because nothing in the room has given it permission to stop. Every object holds equal visual weight, so none of them function as a destination. This is why rooms full of evenly distributed, equally interesting objects often feel busier and less beautiful than rooms with fewer objects organized around one clear focal point. The resting point can be almost anything: a piece of art with enough scale and contrast to hold attention, a single architectural plant against a plain wall, a strong colored object in an otherwise neutral room, but it must be unambiguous. The eye should never have to decide where the room wants it to look. Beautiful small apartments make this decision obvious, and the result is a room that feels resolved rather than merely full. The third principle is the one most consistently misunderstood in small space design, because it contradicts the instinct that smaller rooms need smaller, more numerous, more carefully arranged objects. The opposite is closer to the truth. The proportion rule, drawn from classical composition theory and confirmed repeatedly in perceptual research, holds that visual elements relate to each other most pleasingly not in equal divisions, but in unequal ones. Specifically, ratios closer to the golden ratio of approximately 1 to 1.6 than to a simple 1 to 1 split. This is why a room with one large object and several small ones tends to look more deliberate than a room with several medium objects of similar size. The uneven distribution gives the eye a clear hierarchy to read. This is the dominant element. These are supporting it, rather than asking the eye to evaluate several roughly equal competitors. A tidy room often fails the proportion rule precisely because everything has been made the same size, the same importance, the same visual weight. A beautiful room has a clear hierarchy, one dominant piece, a few supporting elements, and a scale relationship between them that the eye reads as intentional before any conscious analysis occurs. The fourth principle exploits a specific feature of pattern recognition. The brain interprets repeated elements as evidence of intentional design, even when the repetition is subtle enough that it is never consciously noticed. When a shape, material, or color appears more than once in a room, a round mirror echoed by a round side table, the warm brass of a lamp base echoed in a door handle, the particular green of one cushion echoed in a single leaf of a nearby plant, the brain registers a connection between the two instances and interprets that connection as evidence of a coherent plan. A single instance of any element looks accidental. A second instance of the same element transforms the first into something that looks chosen. This is one of the most efficient principles available in small space design because it requires no additional objects, only the deliberate echo of forms or colors that are already present. A room with 3 or 4 small, deliberate repetitions consistently reads as more beautiful and more considered than a room with 3 or 4 times as many unrelated objects, because repetition does the cognitive work of signaling intention that a larger number of unrelated objects cannot do on its own. The fifth principle requires a shift in how empty space is understood, not as the absence of design, but as one of the most powerful design elements available, with its own specific visual function. In visual perception research, negative space, the area around and between objects, is processed by the brain as actively as the objects themselves. It is not a void waiting to be filled. It is the element that gives the surrounding objects their legibility, in exactly the same way that the spaces between words allow language to be read. A page of text without spaces between words is unreadable regardless of how good the individual words are. A room without negative space between objects is similarly unreadable, regardless of how good the individual objects are. Beautiful small apartments allocate negative space deliberately rather than treating it as whatever happens to be left over after every object has been placed. A shelf with 3 objects and generous space between each one reads as more beautiful than the same shelf with 6 objects and no space at all. Not because there are fewer things to look at, but because the negative space allows each remaining object to be read clearly rather than merging into an undifferentiated mass. The sixth principle addresses a finding that often surprises people, because it contradicts the common assumption that symmetry is always the more sophisticated visual choice. Research in visual aesthetics shows a more nuanced picture. Symmetry is processed as orderly and calm, but asymmetrical balance, where elements of different size, shape, or visual weight are arranged to feel equally balanced without being mirror images of each other, is consistently rated as more visually interesting and more sophisticated by viewers across multiple studies. The reason relates back to the visual rhythm and proportion principles already covered. Perfect symmetry resolves a room's visual tension immediately and completely. The eye scans one half, recognizes the mirror, and stops looking, because there is nothing more to discover. Asymmetrical balance keeps the eye engaged slightly longer, because the brain has to do a small amount of additional work to confirm that the room is balanced even though it is not identical on both sides. This very slight additional cognitive engagement is what produces the perception of sophistication. A beautiful small apartment is rarely perfectly symmetrical. It is balanced, a large object on one side answered by 2 smaller, lighter objects on the other, rather than the same object mirrored exactly. And that balance without duplication is what separates a sophisticated room from a merely orderly one. The eighth and final principle ties the previous 7 together, and it explains why a room with one extraordinary, carefully chosen element often looks more beautiful than a room with many good ones. This is sometimes called the focal dominance effect, the finding that visual scenes are processed more quickly and rated as more aesthetically pleasing when they contain one element of clearly superior visual interest rather than several elements competing at similar levels of interest. A small apartment with one genuinely exceptional object, a striking piece of art, an architecturally significant plant, a single chair of real character, gives the eye a clear point of departure for assessing everything else in the room. The other objects are read in relation to this anchor, their own quality elevated by association, their arrangement made legible because the room has an obvious center of visual gravity. Without this anchor, every object in the room competes on equal terms, and the brain has to work harder to find any hierarchy at all, work that registers, even when unconscious, as a room that is merely adequate rather than beautiful. The 7 principles before this one explain how to arrange a room. This principle explains why, of everything in it, one thing should matter more than the rest, and why a small apartment that commits to that idea consistently looks more beautiful than one that spreads its quality evenly across everything it contains.